My pleasure to introduce our first teller, our feature teller today. His name is Norton Dill. Now, one of the problems with introducing somebody like Norton is there's too much material to tell about him. Now, I'm going to try to be short if I can. I certainly don't want to take any more of his time than I need to because you'd much rather hear him than me. But he hails from Birmingham, Alabama. He has had for about 35 years, I think, a production company, film and video production company. They produce everything from 30-second commercials to full-length films and documentaries. He is a man of immense talent and many talents. In addition to being a writer, director, producer, he is a playwright. He's written plays. He has taught high school drama and music. He is a musician. His first band that he organized was when he was 10 years old, and he was the lead ukulele player, I believe, in that band. And he has been in a number of bands since then. For the last 20 years, he has been the leader of a group called the Dill Pickers. Not pickles, but pickers. That is a string band which he describes on his Facebook page as an eclectic performing group. I'm not sure what that means. I think it means they do a little bit of everything, perhaps. But anyway, he is a good musician, and you'll see that shortly. He is from a family of storytellers. His father, both his grandfathers, and his great-grandfather, and his older brother are or were Methodist ministers. So he's got storytelling in his blood. And I'm going to let him demonstrate that now. Norton, let's welcome Norton.
Thank you. Wow, that's the nicest introduction I've ever had. I just wish some of it was true, you know. It is wonderful to be here and so great that we have such a beautiful setting and wonderful weather. I'm glad we didn't go for it last weekend. It would have been quite different. As Alan said, there'll be some storytelling. There might be a poem or two this afternoon. And of course, as you can see, there's going to be a little bit of music. Now, when it comes to music, I can't remember life without it. Of course, when I was a little kid, I didn't know that much about it, but I do remember Sunday mornings on the second pew, sitting with my mother and my older brother too. You see, my daddy was the preacher. He'd stand up in the pulpit and talk about the Bible, but he wasn't one to tell us we're all liable to burn in hell because, well, we're Methodist. Fire and brimstone aren't things that we discuss. It's just not us. It's not our thing. Of course, I was just a little kid back then. I didn't listen to the sermon much, but I sure did like it when we'd sing. One Sunday morning, I noticed Mother wasn't singing just like me and older brother. We were on these notes right here. What a friend we have in Jesus. She was on some others. What a friend we have in Jesus. I listened and I was puzzled. Her singing had me befuzzled. I knew that all of the notes that she was singing were wrong, but at the same time, they sounded like they belonged. I stood there and gazed at her, simply amazed at her ability to come up with different notes that fit. I didn't know what it was, but I liked it. Turns out Mom knew something I didn't know. There's a thought. It was something I hadn't caught. She introduced me to harmony. What a wonderful gift. As a matter of fact, I'm going to say that line again. What a wonderful gift. And she was totally unaware that she had just shared this magical concept with me. I knew how to sing a melody, but Mom taught me there were different parts. And folks, sometimes it's the harmony that touches people's hearts. You can have a beautiful, beautiful melody, but add harmony to it, and it makes it ethereal. Sort of like when you cut up a banana and put it on your cereal. Yeah, I'm sorry about that line. It's the only rhyme I could come up with for ethereal. But for Mom, harmony wasn't just about music. No, it was a way of living. She said, make beautiful music with all people by loving and forgiving. And that's not a lesson that she taught me intentionally. I learned it just by observing. For Flo Dill loved all people, whether worthy or undeserving. Harmony. She taught me two meanings for that word. One that's felt and one that's heard. By the time I remembered where I learned about harmony, my mom had already died. And I still feel bad inside that I never thanked her for that wonderful gift. These days, some Sunday morning standing in the choir, singing tenor harmonies, I have these sudden memories from oh so long ago. Mama singing alto. It always happens during one of the old hymns. I can just hear her voice and I tear up and just struggle to the end. But when it's all done, her little son just gazes up at her and says, thanks, Mom, once again. Thank you. Well, as you can see, all of my early memories about music centered around church music. That's all that I knew. But then when I was about 6 years old, something happened one afternoon that changed everything. My dad came in carrying a big box, and it was funny looking. It had brown sides and top, and the front of it had a curved piece of glass. It was our first black and white television. Now, I had never seen a TV. I didn't know what to expect. Dad plugged it in, turned it on, adjusted the rabbit ears, and I was immediately amazed. Now, of course, back then, there wasn't much programming. But even so, I immediately began to see that there were different kinds of music, stuff that I never heard of that was very different from the church music I had learned. Now, every night at 9 o'clock, the 3 channels, yes, young people, 3 channels. And each one of them played the national anthem. And then they put up the test screen, and that was it for the night. But anyway, great memories about all of that stuff. Now, my mom came from a very musical family. Her mother played guitar. Her daddy and both of her brothers had very rich baritone voices. And as you know, Mom sang alto. She also played the piano a little bit. She and my Uncle Mark were twins. And when they were in high school and college, they used to sing duets together. They go around to churches and all sorts of gatherings. And they were really cute. They were both real short. They were like 2 peas in a pod. Uncle Mark never introduced Mother as his twin sister. He always introduced her as his womb mate. I always liked that. Well, my father, on the other hand, was not very musical. But even so, when I was 2 years old, he decided that he was going to learn to play the violin. So he went out and bought himself a fiddle, took a few, music lessons. Not enough. And let's see, how can I describe Daddy's playing? Let's just say my daddy's fiddle playing was something to hear for a very short period of time. Now, by the time I was 8 years old, we had a family tradition. And that tradition was on Christmas Eve, after we ate supper, we would all gather in the living room and we'd do Christmas carols together. Mom would play the piano. Dad would play his fiddle. Now, this was the only time each year that they touched their instruments. They played once a year. Let me ask you, how many accomplished musicians do you know that play only once a year? Anyone? Yeah. None, of course. And that particular year, to make it even more interesting, my brother had just started playing clarinet in the beginner school band. He had been playing for less than 3 months. So he got his clarinet and started playing with them. Are you beginning to get an idea about what this might have sounded like? Yeah. I sat there and listened with my 8-year-old ears, and I said to myself, in my entire short life, this is the worst music I've ever heard. But then I had an idea. I ran down the hall to my room, dug around in the closet, and I came up with this little drum that I had. Went back to the living room and I started playing my drum. And I personally thought that my percussion made the whole sound a lot better. Unfortunately, my mom didn't see it that way. And halfway through Away in a Manger, she stopped the music and looked at me and said in her sweetest voice, "Darling, let's don't play the drum right now. We don't want to ruin the music, do we?" Yeah. So they started playing again. I took my drum, walked down the hall, flopped on the bed, and cried and cried and cried. I never told Mom about that. She was the sweetest lady in the world. She would have been devastated if she knew that she had hurt my feelings like that. Well, when I quit crying, I sat up in bed, and from down the hall, I could hear the music playing. Mom plunking around on the piano, Daddy scratching on his fiddle, and Larry honking and squeaking on his clarinet. And at that very instant, I said to myself, I'm gonna show them. And that was the beginning of my music career. I joined the children's choir, and I started listening to all music real carefully, trying to figure out what was going on. But it was a couple of years later before I started figuring out what I was going to do about this whole music thing. It was summertime, and I went to spend a few days with my favorite aunt, Aunt Gracie, who lived in Opp, Alabama. Opp, City of Opportunity. When you drive into Opp, that's what the welcome sign says. Quite a few years ago, I mentioned Opp to a friend of mine who lived in Birmingham. Her name was Mary, and she was a very upbeat, happy sort of person. And when I said something about Opp, Mary said, "Oh yeah, I know all about Opp." And her attitude sort of puzzled me, so I started twisting her arm. I was thinking there might be a story behind all of this. She finally told me about something that had happened to her in that fair little city. It was summertime for her, and she was coming back from the beach with her 2 kids. They'd been there for about a week. It was Sunday afternoon, and when they reached Opp, right as they passed the City of Opportunity sign, Mary noticed a little mom and pop ice cream store over on the side. And she said, "We should take a little break. I'll drive through and get some ice cream." So that's what she did. She pulled up to the menu board, rolled down her window, and a man's voice said, "May I take your order, please?" Mary looked over the menu, talked to the kids, placed their order, and he said, "That'll be $4.75. Please drive around to the drive-through window." Well, it was on the other side, so she drove around the back of the building, pulled up to the window. Nobody came to the window, but she waited. She waited some more. She waited some more. Nobody ever came. So she sat up real tall in her seat and looked in the window, and it was totally dark inside. Nobody home. Well, she was puzzled about that, so she put the car in gear, drove around the front this time, and for the first time she noticed that there was no car in the parking lot, totally empty. That was puzzling. She pulled up to the menu board again, but this time when she pulled up, she noticed down at the bottom of the board, attached with duct tape, there was a walkie-talkie. And Mary thought, this is too strange. She was done with it. She drove around the back of the building. She was getting ready to get on the highway. When across the highway, she noticed an old pickup truck. And in the bed of the truck, there were two men sitting in lawn chairs. And one of them had a walkie-talkie in his hand. This is a true story. About that time, another car turned in, and Mary, from a distance, could faintly hear the man say, "May I take your order?" So, that's what you do for entertainment on an afternoon, Sunday afternoon, in the city of opportunity. Yeah. Well, thank you for that smattering of applause. I'm just kidding. Thank you. Mary didn't think too highly of Op, but I always loved Op. And like I said, Aunt Gracie was my favorite aunt. One afternoon when I was there that summer, somebody knocked on the door. And she went to the front of the house. I, of course, followed her. She opened that door, and there on the porch stood a man in a beautiful white navy uniform with a hat and everything. It was my oldest cousin, Mac Norton. As people used to say back then, he had just returned from the service. And he was traveling from Pensacola all the way up to North Alabama where his family lived. And he decided to stop in and surprise Gracie. Well, he ended up spending the night, which was great. I don't know that I had ever met him before, but I sure remembered him after that day. Now, Gracie was a great Southern cook. She cooked us fried chicken and turnip greens and fresh purple hull peas, fried okra, cornbread. Wonderful meal. We stuffed ourselves. And after that, we moved into the living room. And that's when the magic happened. Mac pulled out his old beat-up Sears and Roebuck Stella guitar, and he started playing and singing. I'd never heard or seen anything like it, especially not in person, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. If you knew Peggy Sue, then you'd know why I feel blue about Peggy. My Peggy Sue, well, I love you, girl, and I want you, Peggy Sue. Mac played and sang that Buddy Holly song, and at that very instant, I said to myself, I'm going to do that. It was a very memorable moment. Well, the next Christmas, Santa brought me a ukulele, my first stringed instrument. I was so excited. I started learning chords immediately. And 2 weeks later, I was back in school at Woodrow Wilson Elementary School. And as Alan said, I organized my first entertainment group. It was me, Robbie Esco, and Bill McCrary, a trio. We didn't have a name because we were not smart enough to know that entertainment groups have to have a name. But we started learning some music. We were all in Miss Gusson's fourth grade class. Miss Gusson was the daughter of Edna Gockel Gusson. Anybody know who she was? I can tell that we're in Georgia. Edna Gockel Gusson wrote the state song of Alabama. Let's all sing it. Alabama, Alabama, we will aye be true to thee. From the southern shores where groweth by the sea, thine orange tree. Okay, that's enough of that. Now, I'll have to say, I like the song. And I probably like it because Miss Gusson's mother wrote it and because Miss Gusson made us sing it 2 or 3 times a week the entire year. But I have to admit that these days I think about it. We have that song for our state song in Alabama. And you guys have Ray Charles singing Georgia on My Mind. It's just not fair. It really isn't. Well, anyway, Miss Gusson was not my music teacher. No, my music teacher was named Mrs. Hurt, which was a really appropriate name for her because sitting through her music class was very painful. But Miss Gusson was so much fun. She was full of energy, and boy, she could tear the piano up. And every Friday she would take our class, just our class, to the little auditorium at the school, and she would play and we would sing, songs for 30 minutes or so, and learned a lot of songs from her. And she really inspired me to want to get better with my music. And here was the really cool thing. Once a month, when she took us to the auditorium for some singing and everything, she declared that it was a talent show for our class. And guess who was up there? Anybody who wanted to could get up on the stage and perform. And of course, the boys and I were up there every time. And what we would do is we'd learn a popular song on the radio at the time, and we'd get up and sing it. And there were some great songs back then, including this one. Sing along if you want to. Well, I saw the thing coming down out of the sky. It had one big horn and one big eye. I commenced to shake it and I said, ooh-wee, looks like a purple people eater to me. It was a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. One-horned, flying purple people eater. One-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. Sure looks strange to me. When we got through singing that song, the class cheered and laughed and clapped, and I was hooked for life. I'm telling you. Now, a couple of days after we performed that song, Miss Gusson gave the class an assignment. We had to write a paper, and it could be on any subject. And the only 2 things she mentioned was, it needs to be factual. That means you need to do some research. And you need to use your best creative effort. Well, I knew immediately what I was going to write about. The title of my paper was, Why the Flying Purple People Eater is Extinct. And I didn't have to do any research because I figured it all out in my head. I had been thinking of it in the wrong way. I had just been thinking flying purple people eater. I should have been saying flying purple people eater. The creature was not purple. It ate purple people. And that's why it's extinct. There are no purple people around. Made total sense to me. For my factual score, I got a D-. For my creative score, I got an A+. So it all balanced out. But anyway, for a long time, the next couple of years, our group continued to play occasionally at elementary school. But then in 1958, something happened. You know that my dad was a Methodist preacher. And back then, the rule was, if you're a Methodist preacher, you move every 4 years. And our time was up in Birmingham. And at the annual conference in September, they announced that Dad would now be the senior minister at Anniston First Methodist, Anniston, Alabama, a place I had never heard of. And I was crushed. So on that day in early October, when we packed up and started heading to Anniston, it was a really sad day for me. I had to leave all of my friends. I had to leave my first entertainment group. And it was just a bad day for me until we arrived in Anniston and pulled up to the old parsonage. And there in the front yard sat 3 guys with their bicycles behind them. They had been waiting for quite a while I didn't know it that day, but very soon, Jack Sellers, Carl Taylor, Paul Taylor would be the best friends I'd ever had. We went all the way through school together. Now, during junior high school, I didn't really do much music. I had wanted to be in the band, but we were arriving 6 weeks after school started, and I was afraid I would be too far behind. And I've regretted that forever, that I made that decision, because I probably could have caught up. But what I did instead during junior high school is I worked on my ukulele, and I got better on the ukulele. And then after about a year, I got another instrument. I got a Sears and Roebuck Stella guitar, just like my cousin Max. And I started learning to play that thing. My bedroom was upstairs. I would go up there and close the door and practice and practice and practice. Then about another year after that, I got another instrument, a Sears and Roebuck Silvertone open back 5-string banjo. Now, banjo is a hard instrument to play. So I had to practice it a whole lot. And I would lock myself in the room up there, and I'd play these little banjo licks over and over and over, trying to get them. Same thing, over and over. Occasionally, my mom would come up and knock on the door. Darling, why don't you practice your guitar for a while? That was my introduction to how people feel about the banjo. Well, I knew that I had to work hard on the banjo. So I figured out that because it's an open back, unlike this one, I could get a bath towel and stuff it in the back of the banjo, and it muted it so much I could practice day and night without driving my family crazy. So that's what I did, and practiced, and then when high school rolled around, the whole country was in the middle of the folk music craze. It was just raging. And I decided I wanted to organize another group. My favorite folk music group was Peter, Paul, and Mary. So I organized another trio. It was Jack Sellers, Marlene McCargo, and myself. Jack was short, like Peter. I was tall, like Paul. And Marlene had long blonde hair, like Mary. So we were the perfect knockoff group. And we had a whole lot of fun with it. Now, back in the folk music days, a lot of the most famous folk musicians first were noticed and became famous when they were performing at political rallies and protests and things like that. A lot of folk music was written as protest music. Now, our group didn't participate in that really to speak of, except for one time, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. When we first started rehearsing, we went to Marlene's house and rehearsed in her basement. And at that very first rehearsal, her mother, Dot McCargo, came down and listened a little bit. And then she offered us a deal. She said, y'all can rehearse anytime you want to in my basement if you will let me name the group. And we were like, I don't know about that. But we knew we had to have a place to rehearse, so we agreed. And the next week when we came back to rehearse, Ms. McCargo came downstairs and she announced what our name was going to be. 2 hits and a miss. I was a little embarrassed about the name at first, but you know what? It actually served us pretty well. And we started singing and playing all over the place. We played at school a good bit, played at church, and word got out, and we began to get some invitations to play around town. We did things like Kiwanis Club Ladies Night and stuff like that, you know. But I mentioned that we never were involved in any protest music. There was one occasion. Our very good friend, Bob Clem, was running for the student body president, the president of the student council. And something had happened at school that everybody was upset about. Somehow, the kitchen staff was making meatloaf for the cafeteria one day, and somebody put a couple of those big containers of peanut butter into the meatloaf. And it was the worst tasting thing you've ever had. And the students were all angry, and some of the teachers were up in arms about it. Well, Bob Clem was a smart guy. He saw that anger, and he seized it and used it to his advantage. This was 1963. It was the same year that George Wallace made his famous speech, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Everybody knew about that. So when the final campaign assembly rolled around, Bob Clem got up and gave a stirring speech, and this is how it ended. I promise that if you elect me as president of the student body, there will be no peanut butter in our meatloaf today, no peanut butter in our meatloaf tomorrow, and no peanut butter in our meatloaf forever. Immediately, Two Hits and a Miss launched into a rousing version of a Peter, Paul, and Mary favorite. If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, hammer in the evening, all over this land. The student body leapt to their feet, and Bob Clem won the election by a landslide. It was the only time we ever participated in protest music, I guess you might say. Well, our most memorable singing engagement was about 2 months later. That fall, the YMCA in Anniston decided they were going to start doing hootenannies. And, hootenanny is just a gathering of people singing folk music and having fun. And they started having them for all the young people in town. It was once a month. So our group had performed in September and also in October. And then the YMCA called us and said that they would like for us not only to perform in November, but also to host the event and MC the whole thing. So we were very excited about it. The date of the hootenanny in November was Saturday night, November 23rd. And then the day before, November 22nd, JFK was assassinated. And the whole world changed. I remember that everyone just seemed to be sort of numb. Didn't know what to do, didn't know what to say. It was the only time in my life that I saw my father cry. He was not a crier. Of course, there's a lot of talk about what to do about the hootenanny. But after some discussion, the leaders of it decided we should go ahead and do it. And that's what we did. Now, usually a hootenanny was rowdy, lots of loud singing, lots of laughing. But of course, this one took on a different tone. And I would say a different purpose. JFK really liked Peter, Paul, and Mary. It was one of his favorite groups. They had performed a concert at the White House. He had seen them at a number of other political gatherings, and he was a big fan. So we decided that we would do some of the president's favorite Peter, Paul, and Mary songs that night, including this one that was written by Bob Dylan. Y'all want to listen to this helicopter go over for a minute? Let's all wave to him. Where are you? Okay. How many times must a man look up before he can see the sky? Yes, and how many years must one man have before he can hear people cry? Yes, and how many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Good Peter, Paul, and Mary song. Thank you. Jack, Marlene, and I graduated from high school the following spring. And luckily, we all ended up together at Birmingham Southern College, a nice, very good liberal arts school in Birmingham. We ended up together there in the fall. We played a couple of times that fall, but it became obvious pretty quickly that we were going in different directions, and we finally decided that we were going to just call it off in the group. We never performed together again until 6 years ago at our 50th high school reunion, which was a lot of fun. Well, by the end of that freshman year, I was really missing performing. I mean, I love to do this. And I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it all summer. I happened to go see a guy perform in Birmingham. And after he finished his performance, I went up and started talking with him. And he told me about something that he had done. For 2 years, he had been a member of a folk music group called the Town Criers. And their main claim to fame was they went to Gatlinburg, Tennessee in the summer, and they played at an outdoor place called Homespun Valley. It's right close to the middle of town. He was talking about it, and it sounded like so much fun. We finally parted ways, and as I was walking away from him, I had another one of those moments when I said, I'm going to do that. We got back to school in the fall, and I started organizing another group. Birmingham Southern is called the Hilltop. So we named ourselves the Hilltop Singers. We started learning songs. We started doing our work. And early spring, I went to Gatlinburg to find us a place to perform. And I was crushed to find out that all of the venues had already booked their acts for the summer. I had even walked up to Homespun Valley. It's just a block off of the main street. And when I found out from them that they were all booked, I was pretty depressed. Started walking back downtown, and I passed this big lot that didn't have anything on it except an old log cabin. Log cabin was boarded up. I asked around, and I found out that that cabin and the property was owned by a lady named Hattie Ogle McGiffin, and that I could find her down at the Mountain View Hotel. Mountain View was right at the end of the street that I was walking on, right on Main Street. So I ran down there, went in the lobby, asked for Hattie McGiffin, and the lady said, I'll be back. She came back in a couple of minutes with the laundry lady. And I was confused. Gatlinburg was founded about 1801 by a man named William Ogle. And Hattie Ogle McGiffin was a descendant. By the time I met her in 1966, she was 68 years old. She had lived in Gatlinburg her entire life, and she had inherited all of the family land. She owned everything from Shoney's in the middle of town all the way out to the national park, all the way down to the river and up the hill a good ways. She was worth millions. But even so, she lived in one room at the Mountain View Hotel, which she also owned, and she did the laundry for the motel every day. She was just a good old hard-working mountain woman. Well, I sat down with her and I told her what we wanted to do. We would like to rent this property. We'll put up a big, tall wooden fence all the way around it. We'll build an entranceway with a ticket booth. We'll build a porch on that cabin. That'll be our stage. We'll name the place the porch, and between Memorial Day and Labor Day, we'll do shows every night that it doesn't rain. Didn't take her any time to decide. She immediately said, Well, I reckon you can do that. And I reckon you can give me 10 cents off of every dollar what you bring in. Well, I thought that sounded like a great deal. So I said, yes, ma'am. Yes, let's do that. Do you have a contract I can sign? Don't need no contract. Shake my hand. I shook her hand, and for the next 4 years in the summertime, every week, I would take her a check for 10% of what we brought in, and she'd say, thank you. And not once did she ever ask to see our books. Now, I bet you can't do a deal like that in Gatlinburg anymore. She was an amazing lady. She was born in 1898. She died in 2002 at the age of 104. She is the only person I have ever known that lived in 3 centuries, 1800s, 1900s, 2000s. Think about it. That is amazing. Now, I hope you don't think I'm making fun of her when I use a crazy voice. I actually had tremendous respect for her. And I love the way that the people of Sevier County talk. They have words that we don't even use at all. We don't even know about them. I had another friend at Birmingham Southern, a lady named Carol, who married a guy who became a doctor. And somehow they ended up at a little family clinic out in the countryside from Sevierville. They're out in Sevier County. And Carol, for a while, was the receptionist at the clinic. She said that one day, this old couple walked in, and she could tell by looking at them that they were from out in the boondocks somewhere, up in the mountains. And they walked up, and the old man took a quart-sized mason jar and put it on the counter, and it was filled with a yellow liquid. And Carol looked at it and said, is that urine? And the old man said, nope, it's herring. Sevier County, gotta love it. Well, we finished building the stuff that we needed, and it was time to round up some audience members. Here's how we did it. Every night we would meet at the porch, tune our instruments up, and then we would pile onto a yellow Corvair convertible that had the Hilltop Singers painted on both sides. We would go to the far end of Main Street and we'd start working our way back. We'd stop and go in every restaurant along the way. They would allow us 2 minutes in each restaurant. There's a meeting here tonight. There's a meeting here tonight. And tell by the smile that's on your face, there's a meeting here tonight. We'd play and sing. We'd pass out brochures. We'd tell them all about what we were doing. We're the Hilltop Singers. We got 3 shows tonight, 8, 9, 10 o'clock. Told them how to get there. And then we'd go out with a big finish. There's a meeting here tonight. There's a meeting here tonight. Come on in and join us. There's a meeting here tonight. We'd go out of there. We would race out of there. And we're off to the next place. We would, depending on the traffic in town, we would do between 15 and 20 restaurants a night. And when we got back to the porch, people would be lined up buying their tickets and going in to choose their seats. It was great fun. And for a bunch of college kids, we made fantastic money, most of which went straight to Birmingham Southern College. Now, the only bad thing about performing in Gatlinburg at that time was that at 10 o'clock, they just rolled the sidewalks up. It was such a family place, family destination. Now, our last show was at 10 o'clock, so by the time we got through, there was nothing to do. We couldn't go eat anywhere. So we would end up going to each other's places and we'd, cook out and unwind. And occasionally somebody in town would throw a party. There were several groups in town. One night, a group called the Gentlemen invited us to a party. The Gentlemen was a group of 4 law students from the University of Tennessee. Really nice guys. They did an indoor show at one of the hotels downtown. They invited us to come out to this little chalet that they had rented out in the woods, outskirts of town. So we were excited about it. We went out there. It was a really nice party. We were there. The Gentlemen were there. And a bunch of people from the Hunter Hills Summer Stock Theater were there. So we're just going along. They had some food for us and had a couple of coolers of beer. Now, I have to tell you, at that point, I did not drink. My mom was a teetotaler, and my entire life, she had told me that liquor should never touch my lips. And it was like a threat, you know. A few years later, I was able to overcome my fear of that threat, but not while I was in Gatlinburg. So a little bit after midnight, we're just standing around talking, and all of a sudden, there are some lights flashing, coming in through the windows of the chalet. Everything got really quiet. And all of a sudden, there's a big, aggressive knock on the door. Boom, 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 boom. Our host, Randy, went over, opened the door, and immediately 4 Sevier County deputies rushed in, and the head deputy said, "Hands up, everybody. Ewins is under arrest." And Randy, you know, good law student that he was, said to the old deputy, "Excuse me, sir, but what are the charges?" And the deputy said, public drunkenness. To which Randy said, "Well, sir, you see, this is not a public place. This is a private residence. So that is not a legitimate charge." Turns out that wasn't the best thing to say to the deputy. He grabbed Randy, spun him around, put some cuffs on him, hauled him out to the patrol car. Next thing you know, the other 3 deputies are herding the rest of us out there. I've got kids here. They don't even know anything about this. We went outside, and they hadn't thought this thing through. There were 25 of us. There were 4 of them, and they came in 2 patrol cars. And the Sevier County Jail was 45 minutes away. But even so, they just proceeded, and one of the deputies opened the back door of the first patrol car, started shoving people in. Now, the first people he shoved in were members of the Summer Stock Theater group. And you know, theater people can be sort of creative. This first guy sat down, slid over to make room for somebody else. And when he got to the other side, he discovered that he could open the back door. Now, why he could open the back door in a patrol car, I don't know, but I watched him do this. He opened the door, dropped to the ground, crawled out into the woods on his hands and knees, and it was dark out there. So did the next person, and the next person, and the next person, until 8 people had disappeared into the woods in the dark. The 9th person to be loaded in was a young lady from the theater group, and she was afraid to do it. So she went over there, closed the door, and then, of course, the thing filled up very quickly. They put 5 or 6 people in the back. They were just piled all over each other. The guy closed the door, and, you know, I couldn't figure out how he thought he had gotten all of those people in there. I mean, did he work at a circus and, you know, the clown put 20 clowns in a Fiat or something like that? Well, anyway, he moved to the second car. It filled up really quickly. Closed the door, turned around, and there are 5 of us left, including myself and our bass player, Doug Braswell. The head deputy came over and spoke to Doug and said, "Have you got a car?" And Doug said, "Yes, sir, I do." "All right, you go get your car and you pull it in right behind that patrol car right yonder. and these people going to ride with you. You follow that car, I'm going to be following you, and no funny stuff. You hear? So let's think about that for a minute. Doug Braswell, who is being charged with public drunkenness, was also being ordered to drive his car 45 minutes to the Sevier County Jail. But that's what happened. We got to the jail a little bit after 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm so sorry my grandkids are having to hear this. We got to the jail after 1 o'clock in the morning. We walked in, and the guy behind the desk was not happy to see us. He had just pulled out his lunch bag, his middle of the night, brown bag meal, and in walked 17 people who have to be booked. Well, he was grumbling around, and he couldn't find his booking forms. He was opening drawers and slamming them, and going to the closet and looking in shelves and filing cabinets. Couldn't find them. So he came over and sat down, and yes, this is a true story. He pulled his sandwich out. He pulled his apple out. He pulled his bag of chips out. He flattened that sandwich bag out, and he started writing our names on the bag. It's what they call Sevier County bag booking. It took quite a while and both sides of the bag to get us all booked, and then they sent us upstairs to the jail block, the cell block. Who remembers what the jail cells in Mayberry looked like? Yeah. Well, it was exactly the same thing. Looked just like it. As a matter of fact, when they brought us in, there was a guy in the first cell, for all the world looked like Otis. I think he must have been a regular. They took us, there were 3 other cells, so they jammed all of us into those 3 cells, and we spent the night there. That was it. The next morning, well, I need to tell you this. While I was sitting on that hard concrete floor, couldn't go to sleep, was upset, we were all in a mess. And I decided that I was just going to tune everything else out, and I was going to write a song in my head to commemorate or immortalize the experience that we were having. And here's the song. I'm sleeping tonight in Sevierville, top of the courthouse, Sevier County Jail. I don't have a guitar or banjo to play, and no one to come make my bail. We started out picking and singing tonight, floating music all over these hills. But incarceration came into my life and left me with a case of the chills. It's lonely tonight in the jailhouse. No one to talk to but 17 friends. We don't understand how this whole thing got started or how this sad story ends. Is this the place where everything changes, where life as I've known it comes to a stop? I've been charged with being a drunkard without even touching a drop. All right. So the next morning, one of the deputies came up there, unlocked the cells, and said, "You can leave. Go, go." We didn't understand. As soon as I got outside, I realized I got to call my mother and dad. Oh, man. Man, I did not want to make that call. But I thought, if I don't tell them this about that, here's what's going to happen. One morning, Dad's going to be sitting at the breakfast table, sipping his coffee. He'll pick up his paper, and on the front page, there'll be a banner headline that says, "Local minister's son arrested." So I went and found a phone booth and called them. But I tried to put a positive spin on it. "Mom, Dad, hey, yeah, it's me. Yeah. Hey, I got some good news. I got out of jail." They were so surprised. And they were so excited that they immediately hopped in the car and drove straight to Gatlinburg. They wanted me to tell them all about it. Yeah. Well, it actually turned out all right. The gentlemen, being law students, had connections in the legal community all over eastern Tennessee. And very quickly, a high-powered attorney came to Sevierville to talk to the judge. He went in and spoke to the judge, sat down with him, and told him what was going on, and the judge didn't know anything about it. Nothing had come to his desk. But the judge said, "Well, I tell you what, when this thing comes to my desk, I'm tearing it up and throwing it out." And here's the reason why he did that. Bat Gibson was the sheriff in Sevier County at that time. That was his real name. And Bat was running for re-election. It was an election year, and he was way behind in the polls. So he had ordered all of his deputies to go out and find people to arrest. Arrest anybody and everybody you can, especially if they're not from Sevier County. He figured that that would make him look good and that he'd be reelected. Sadly, it was true. He was reelected. But before that could happen, the judge had thrown this whole thing out. And I found out later on that even if the judge hadn't thrown it out, we had nothing to worry about. You remember Officer Whaley, that was the one that booked us? Well, after he went back to his middle of the night meal, he got his sandwich wrapper, his apple core, his empty bag of chips, put them in that brown bag, wadded it up and threw it in the trash, along with the names of 17 accused drunkards. So, all in all, it turned out really well for me. I had the amazing experience of spending a night in jail, and there's no record of it anywhere. We were innocent. That was a long time ago, over 50 years ago. And speaking of time, why don't we take a little break right now? We've got Mary Ellen who's going to come and do a story for us, or some stories for us. And anything else I need to say? Well, I'll let you do the break.
We are going to take, big hand.
That's for you.
Oh, no, that's for you. So, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Ellen. Let's make her feel welcome.
Y'all, don't ever pray, "Dear God, I need something to do." About 40 years ago, I was late 20s. I was living in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I was at a young adults party for my Presbyterian church. You know, young adults, they were the ones who never made it yet to the young marrieds. We graduated from college, and they needed someplace to put us, so we had the young adults. I love the young adults group. They were graduate students, and they were doing things. It was really fun. We were at a party at someone's house, and I heard a guy across the room talking about the meanest teacher ever, that nobody had a teacher who was as mean as his teacher. And I thought, pfft. So I walked over and I said, "You didn't have the meanest teacher. I had the meanest teacher ever." He said, No, you just don't understand. This was Sister Mary Boniface. And I looked at him and said, Could there be two? Come to find out, he grew up in Baltimore too, and he went to Immaculate Heart of Mary School, and he had Sister Mary Boniface the year before I did. He blamed her for every trauma in his life. I never thought about that, but it would have been a good idea. Immaculate Heart of Mary, I was born in 1952 at Mercy Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland, run by the Mercy Nuns. Several years later, 6 years later, I entered Immaculate Heart of Mary School. You can tell enough, I'm around here. I entered Immaculate Heart of Mary School, also run by the Mercy Nuns. I got notes. The parish of Immaculate Heart of Mary was a neighborhood of row homes. Row homes were the homes built for all the veterans who were returning. We were the baby boomers, and this was the baby boomer neighborhood. 6 houses, a little gap, 6 more houses, a little gap, 6 more houses, a little gap, and on and on. Willow Oak Road, Pin Oak Road, Chestnut Oak Road, Water Oak Road. That was my neighborhood. It was a lovely place to grow up. It had, unlike the city row homes in Baltimore that you've seen, kind of iconic with marble steps, we had lawns and backyard lawns. The front yard was a great place to stay, and it was a great place to live. You went out front with your mom and dad and played. But the place where the kids played was the alley. We had lawns, but we chose to play on the cement drive that went between the back of the two where all the houses met. I don't know why. I think it was because that's where all the kids were. You didn't go in somebody's backyard unless you were invited, but in the alley, you just hang out till somebody showed up, and then you'd play. We played wonderful things like hide and seek, but also throw the brick up in the air and see who catches it. We still have the dent. When I was ready for first grade, my mom, I was 6, my mom was 26, my sister was 4, my brother was 2, and my other brother was about to make his debut in December of that year. My mother assured me that she walked me to school the first day of school, but I still can't figure out how in the world she did it. I was all dressed up in my uniform, navy blue jumper, oversized Peter Pan collar with a bow tie. Girls' bow ties were pointed, boys' bow ties were squared. Anklets, brown Oxford, brown book bag, and a beanie. I had a ponytail, so getting the beanie on was always a issue. The beanie. I was assigned to Sister Mary Boniface's first grade PM class. We had an AM class that met from about 8 to 11, and then a PM class that met from 12 to 3. There were 50 kids in the morning. There were 50 kids in the afternoon. I really couldn't believe this, and I checked this with Ed Stuyvesant, who also talks about he's a great storyteller who talks about his times in Catholic school, and he assured me that I was absolutely right. My mother was absolutely right. There were 50 kids in the first grade in the morning, and then I came with my friends, 49 of them, in the afternoon. Sister Mary Boniface and all the Mercy Nuns wore a white wimple with no hair visible, a black veil, a black habit, it was called, black shoes, black stockings, black belt with a humongous rosary that hung down. The only way you could tell they were coming was the sound of the swish of the skirt and the jangle of the rosary. We learned that sound early. Sister Boniface was a very strict teacher. My uncle started calling her Sister Mary Bonyface. It helped a little. She put up with no nonsense, and to her credit, it seemed like all 50 of us read, wrote, added, and subtracted. We usually didn't mess with her, and we certainly didn't try, and I certainly didn't try, until one day, and I just couldn't help it. The big deal in first grade Catholic school was First Communion. Spring of first grade, you went to First Communion, and we practiced relentlessly. Sit, kneel, stand, turn to your left, walk up to the altar, kneel. We learned the click. All was well until one afternoon the sisters were conferencing over to the side. Even if they were conferencing over to the side, there was still an older nun who was charged with watching the children. I'll sit next to Eleanor Schott, and she was kind of doing a little hand jive, but she was really stilted, but you could tell she was doing the hand jive. I thought it was great, and I was just watching her, and I might have done, I don't remember, but I was really enjoying watching her at least do the hand jive. When Sister came back and asked the older nun, how are they doing? And of course the nun said, everything is fine, except there's a little problem in the third row. We were marched to the back of the church, sat on either side of the aisle, and Sister announced to us that we were to bring a note the next day from our parents about how we were being punished. Remember, there were, by this time, 4 children, one very overworked lineman for the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company who took every bit of overtime he could find, and one very hassled mother. I just really felt that I did not need to add to any problems. So I wrote a note. I was supposed to be able to read what my punishment was, and I could not read cursive, so certainly my mother would write so I could read it. I had excellent handwriting. I always got the excellent stamp on my copybook. Always. This was perfect. My reasoning was perfect. My handwriting was perfect. This was going to work. I don't know if I got it the first day to Sister. I don't know if this took me a couple of days to formulate. But anyway, I finally got the note in, handed it to Sister, and Sister left the room. As a former elementary school teacher, I now know that her first stop was probably to the teacher of across the hall, saying, "You're not going to believe this one." And sure enough, her next move was to call my mom, who walked up to school with Bonnie, 4, George, 2, and Stephen, 4 months. I don't know who wasn't crying. I don't think Sister was crying. My mother says, I think she was trying not to laugh. there were no real repercussions after that. She let me go back to class. My mother went home. Yes, I don't remember. It was a blur. My parents never said another word, perhaps because they too had spent 12 years in Catholic school. Never heard another word. It became kind of a family thing. I did manage to finish first grade, got my first communion, wore the veil and the white dress that I'm sure my grandmother spent an entire week's salary on, and I made it through first grade. A couple of years later, actually many years later, my mom had an idea. She was really good friends with a couple of the nuns who were retired and living at Stella Maris. And, she thought, it'd be a great idea if you went, Sister Boniface, you should go see Sister Boniface and tell her you became a teacher. She would be so thrilled. I said, Mom, Sister Boniface? And she said, Mary Ellen, she was a lovely woman. She was just overworked. I looked at her and I just said, no way. I'm not going. I always listened to what my mom said. At that time, I just couldn't. Mercy is a funny thing. Showing mercy doesn't always mean giving in. It may involve correction and discipline. Sister Boniface taught 100 first graders reading, writing, and arithmetic every day. We didn't laugh a lot, but we learned a lot. We learned how to sit still and listen. We learned good citizenship and good manners. And most of us got over the trauma and can now laugh to tell the story.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. That was great. Well, we're going to bring back Norton Dill here, but before I do, let me just say another word or two. I think I told you earlier that he does have a production company, and several years ago, he did a documentary entitled Catherine, the Story of a Teller, I believe. Is that the name of the documentary? And it's about a longtime favorite of ours here in LaGrange, as the name implies, Catherine Tucker Wyndham, the late Catherine Tucker Wyndham now. And that documentary began a long and fruitful relationship, I think, between Norton and Miss Catherine. And Norton says, that one of the lessons, or maybe the most important lesson he learned from Miss Catherine, was that the true value of stories comes from family stories which are told through the ages from generation to generation. And that's a lesson I think all of us would do well to heed, and to be sure that we're telling our stories so that future generations will know about us and know these stories and can carry on family stories. So I give you once again Norton Dill.
Thank you. Last night when Joyce and Bill and Carol and I were talking, we talked about Miss Catherine, and I said to them, and this is sort of corny, hanging out with her and getting to be close friends with her absolutely changed my life. She was an amazing person. And the best thing I loved about her and learned from her is she was fearless about life and she was fearless about death. And that's a really good combination. I'm going to grab a hat. I may even wear it sort of funny to keep the sun out of my eye. My first job out of college was teaching at Winona High School. It was an all-black high school on the outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama. I went there in 1968 as the choir and drama director. 1968, tail end of the civil rights movement. Winona had 1,400 students, faculty and staff of over 100 people. And the first year I was there, I was one of 4 white teachers who had come to join the faculty. And before I go any further, just let me say, teaching at Winona and being a part of that community was one of the great experiences of my life. And my family members and my friends will all vouch for the fact that hardly a week goes by without me telling some sort of story about Winona. I loved being at Winona. But that doesn't mean it was an easy job, especially not right at first. The first year was pretty tough. I didn't know what I was doing. That was what mostly made it tough. But also, it was a little bit of a tough school. We had a wonderful principal. His name was Mr. William F. Hawes. He's a very kind man, cared about all the students and the teachers, but he wasn't a disciplinarian. And Winona needed some discipline. I found out very early on that each teacher had to maintain control in his or her class. It was just up to the individual. So I started talking to different teachers about how they did it, trying to figure out something that would help me. There were as many different ideas about how to do it as there were teachers that I asked. The one that I remember the most was Mrs. Marzette. Mrs. Marzette had taught there for a long time. She was the home economics teacher. And her classroom was on the bottom floor of the building, all the way out at the end of the hall. She was as far away from the main office as you could get. And on top of that, she was right across the hall from the band room. Now, the band director, Bill Harris, and I became very good friends. We worked together a lot. We'd do a Broadway musical every year, and I did the theater part. He did the orchestra. But everybody knew that Bill's band members were just out of control. And it was a problem for Mrs. Marzette because sometimes these young men from the band would wander out into the hall, and the next thing you know, they wander into her class and mess with her girls. And she didn't like that. But Mrs. Marzette had been there a long time, and she knew exactly how to handle it. It's the home ec department. She had some stoves in there. She would come in the morning and pull a 4-quart pot off of the shelf, fill it up with water, put it on the stove, turn it on high. The water would start boiling. It boiled all day long. If one of those young men came sauntering into her room, messing with her girls, Mrs. Marzette very calmly, very quietly would go over, pick up that pot, walk toward the young man and say, "May I help you?" It was amazingly effective. They learned not to go in there. Now, you of course could not get away with doing something like that today. And that didn't really help me any because number one, I didn't have a stove in my room. And number two, that wasn't my style. My idea was that I was going to try to find some kind of incentive that would get the kids excited, especially my choir kids. I wanted them to behave. I wanted them to work hard. I wanted it to be a great choir because they had not had a choir in quite a while when I arrived there. Well, I liked all of those kids immediately. I was crazy about them. But this was new territory for me and new territory for them. I had never been a school teacher. They had never had a white teacher. I had never been a part of the Black community. So there was a lot of stuff that we had to learn, Probably the highlight of the first year for me was one day late in the fall. I'd been there about 3 months, and something happened that gave me this glimmer of hope that these kids were really beginning to like me. Back then, I had terrible allergies. I was constantly sneezing, coughing, I had runny nose, itchy eyes. And one day, right in the middle of choir practice, I had a terrible allergy fit. trying to, be discreet about it, I turned my back to the choir. I pulled out my handkerchief and I was wiping my eyes, blew my nose and all that stuff. Sort of got myself together again. I turned around, and when I turned around, over the half of the choir had pulled out handkerchiefs, and they started blowing their noses and making honking sounds and all this crazy stuff. And, it really was funny, and it was quite a surprise. But in a very strange way, it totally warmed my heart, because I have always felt like you don't make fun of somebody to their face unless you really like them. And boy, they were throwing it right in my face, So that was a great day, and it changed our relationship. And from that point on, the relationship got better and better. Made it through the first year, and I was still looking for that incentive. Over the summer, I figured out something, and I decided to make an appointment with Mr. Hawes the week before school started. I went in and talked to him to tell him my idea and see what he thought. I sat down and I said, Mr. Hawes, I need an incentive to help these kids to want to work harder, make them behave better. I want this to be a great choir, but I've got to have some better discipline. I need something to hang over their head. Mr. Hawes said, well, I like the way you're thinking, Mr. Dill. Tell me what you have in mind. I said, during spring holidays, I want to go and take the kids on a choir tour. Mr. Hawes sort of smiled and looked down at his desk and chuckled a little. Well, Mr. Dill, that's a mighty fine idea, but you see, we're not able to do that. We're not allowed. I said, what are you talking about, Mr. Hawes? I mean, schools all over the place go on trips. I don't understand. Mr. Dill, you are not hearing me. I said, we are not allowed to do that. I didn't know it, but the Board of Education had a rule. Black schools could not take an overnight trip. End of story, closed case. Okay, Mr. Hawes. I understand. I'll see if I can figure out something else. I stood up and was headed for the door, and it was like one of those scenes out of a movie. We've all seen one like this. Two people are having a conversation. One of them gets up to leave, and then this one says something again. I had my hand on the doorknob, and Mr. Hawes said, but Mr. Dill. I turned and looked at him. He said, Mr. Dill, if you were to get some friends together during spring break, and y'all were to rent a bus and go somewhere, and I didn't know about it, there wouldn't be much I could do, would there? I said, Mr. Hawes, are you saying that? Mr. Dill, if I don't know about it, there's nothing I can do. The next 4 years, the Winona Singers went on a highly illegal choir tour. Not illegal from the point of view of the law, but from the point of view of the Board of Education. 8 years ago, I was invited to be the speaker at the 40th reunion of the class of Winona High School in 1972. And a bunch of my choir members were there that night. And I told them this story. They'd never heard it. And I said to them, do you guys realize what Mr. Hawes risked so that you could have some experiences that you would otherwise not be able to have? He risked not only his job, but his career and his reputation as an educator, just so y'all could go someplace you've never been before and share your talent with people you've never seen before. William Hawes was the most foolishly courageous man I have ever known. He just passed away last year. And it was an amazing thing he did for those kids. And I've got some crazy stories to tell about our choir tour. I haven't got time to tell all of them. I will tell you this. The first year, We were thinking about different places to go. We went someplace different every year. First year, we went to Panama City, Florida during spring break. And that shows what good judgment I had when I was 22 years old. Lots of stories about that, but we're not going to do that. But what I want to do is tell a story about one of my students, one of my most talented students. And I'm going to switch to this mic. Let's see. All right. Can still hear me. This student was the best gospel-style piano player I ever had. Her name was Theresa Harris. She was tall and thin. She had big, long fingers. She could play chords that I couldn't begin to play. And she was just super talented. Now, here's the way things worked with the choir. We did classical music. We did popular music. We did some written arrangements of African American spirituals. All of that kind of music. I chose the music. I directed it the way I thought it should be directed. I was in charge. We also did a lot of gospel music. And when it came to gospel music, there was a role reversal. The kids became the teachers, and I became the student. They would bring songs in, usually songs they knew from church. They'd sing them, and together we'd decide whether we're going to use them in our concerts or not. One day, Theresa brought a song in. I'd never heard it before. All the kids knew it from church. They sang it for me, and I liked it pretty much. Oh, where's my sound? There we go. They sang the song. I loved it. They liked it. We did it in a lot of concerts. But when I first heard them play and sing it, I thought it wasn't in the best key for them. So I said, Theresa, what key are you playing that in? And she said, I don't know. I said, what note does it start on? She said, that one right there. I said, Theresa, do you know the name of that note? No, sir. I said, that note is C. You're playing in the key of C. Can you play it on this note? Yes, sir. What's the name of that note? I said, that is F. She played it. I was intrigued. I said, Theresa, can you play it on this note right here? Yes, sir. What's the name of that note? That is D. She played it. She played it better than I did. I was beginning to feel a little bit of a challenge. I wanted to stump her. I said, Theresa, can you play it on this note right here? She said, that black note? Mm-hmm. What's the name of that note? I said, that is E flat. And she said, E flat? She played it. I finally gave her my best shot. Theresa, can you play it on this note right here? F sharp, in my opinion, the hardest key to play in on the piano. I can't play it. She could play any song that she knew in any key on the piano, and she didn't know the name of a single note. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing. 50 years later, I still don't understand it. She knew more about the structure of music than anyone who sat in my last year of music theory at Birmingham Southern College. She was a brilliant musician, but had no idea just how gifted she was. That whole experience really had a big effect on me. I started thinking about all of the wonderful experiences and opportunities I had had. Then I started thinking about my kids at Winona and the fact that most of them would not have the same kind of opportunities that I had had. And that just didn't seem fair. I had marched into Winona High School with my freshly printed music degree. And I was going to teach those kids all about music. And I'm sure that they learned some things. But to be quite honest about it, I learned so much more from them. And it wasn't all just about music. There's so many life lessons that I learned from being at Winona. I was just a kid back in '68, fresh out of college, and I couldn't wait to show the world some stuff. I was ready, but I wasn't rough. Got myself a job at a school. Turns out I was a daggum fool who didn't even have a clue about what I was supposed to do. Monday I was scared, Tuesday was the same. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday came and went. I made the grade. Skinny white geek made it through the week at a school of a different shade. Oh, Winona, I quickly realized that you would help me see the world through a different set of eyes. Oh, Winona, thank you, ma'am, for molding me and making me into the person that I am. Years passed, they flew by fast. The days are gone, but the memories last. And every little while, you still can make me smile. Oh, Winona, thank you, ma'am, for guiding me and teaching me, for helping me and loving me, for molding me and making me into the person that I am. Thank you. About 20 years after I left Winona, my wife Lonnie and I were attending a show in downtown Birmingham at the Civic Center, Birmingham Broadway series. At intermission, we were out in the hall, out in the lobby. Big, huge room full of people, but across that room, I saw this tall African-American lady, and she was looking at me. And we did that thing where we locked eyes for just a split second. Then we both looked away because we're embarrassed, Anybody ever done that? Yeah. Well, Lonnie and I kept talking. I glanced over there again, and she wasn't looking at me. And I thought, wow, she sure looks familiar. About that time, she looked at me. We locked eyes again, looked away. The next time I looked in that direction, she was halfway across the room, walking straight toward me. She walked up to me and said, "Are you Mr. Dill?" I said, "I sure am. Are you Theresa Harris?" She said, "Yes, sir, I sure am. I thought it was you, but I didn't know until you blew your nose." True story. Well, guys, it's been great being with you this afternoon. We talked about Miss Catherine just a minute ago. I'm going to grab my banjo and I want us to do something together. After we did the After we did the documentary film, Miss Catherine invited our crazy group, the Dill Pickers, to come to Selma and perform at her storytelling festival. And the one request she had was that we should do her favorite song to end the festival. And ever since then, every show that the Dill Pickers have ever done has ended with that. And her favorite song is I'll Fly Away. We played it on Combs at her graveside. And I got a feeling she may be looking down at us today. So we'll do a couple of verses and then we'll be on our way. Thank you so much for allowing me to have a wonderful time this afternoon. Hope you've had a good time. Y'all ready? 1, 2, 3. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away to a land on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by. I'll fly away. Now, I know a lot of y'all have masks on, but y'all can sing louder than that for Miss Catherine. Just a few more weary days and then fly away. Good. To a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by. I'll fly away when I die. Hallelujah, by and by. I'll fly away. Thank you very much. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. One more time, a hand for both of our tellers. All right, just a couple of announcements before you go. I've already told you about, of course, the festival in March. That is, of course, a festival where you have to buy a ticket or tickets. But we have one more free event that's coming up, usually about 3 or 4 weeks before the March festival. We have something called Taste of Storytelling. It's normally at LaGrange Memorial Library, but I think they're going to be undergoing renovations, and so we don't know just yet when or where it's going to be. We know when, but we haven't found a place yet. It'll be February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, so that'd be a good thing and a cheap thing, since it's free, that you can take your sweetie to, okay? So be sure to look on the LSPA website sometime between now and then to see exactly where this is going to go, or where we'll be having this. Other than that, that is it. I hope you had a good time. Please be careful going home. Stay safe.